Legislative Review on Prairie Public. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us. Our guest this week is the chairman of the Senate Human Services Committee, State Senator Judy Lee from West Fargo. She's a Republican. Senator, thanks for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
You know, you talk about the Human Services Committee, and human services is such a huge part of North Dakota's budget, and it's a very huge issue.
It absolutely is, because it's a very large umbrella. It includes everything really from before birth until after death and everything in between. And it covers a lot of healthcare issues as well. So we've had some additional responsibilities there.
What has been your biggest issue this session?
Well, one of the largest, although not the only certainly, is that we've had a wonderful task force that's worked on behavioral health issues that supported a consultant, which was hired and served the Interim Human Services Committee, which was chaired by Representative Damshin. And there are over 400 people from around the state that have been involved with this, that have provided information about what things are needed, what access there is to services, where the barriers are. And so we have several bills working their way through both the House and the Senate right now, mostly in appropriations as of today. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to have some success in advancing those services throughout the whole state, because we definitely have a shortage.
Not to put too fine a point on it, you get the policy, appropriations gets the money.
Exactly. However, the policy committee, at least as long as I've been there, and with the previous chair with whom I served as well, wanted to establish some priorities and not leave that all to appropriations, because we've had a chance to hear the people testify about what the programs do and whether or not they've really been effective. So we certainly work with the Appropriations Committee, and Senator Holmberg has been terrific about collaborating with the policy committees in his years as Appropriations Chair.
Well, you talk about the issue of behavioral health. It's a multifaceted issue. Absolutely,
and what we ended up doing was dividing up as we got towards the end, so that we had work groups on children's, or actually adolescent, children's and adolescent behavioral health, adult behavioral health, substance abuse, and workforce. And they're all important, and they all go together, but there weren't enough of us to go around for everybody to be involved with everything. And they have done wonderful work and are there still to be resources for our committees.
With the growth in the state and the growth especially in western North Dakota, has that exacerbated the issue?
Absolutely, and it isn't because we don't have good people moving into the state, it's because we have more people moving into the state. And with it comes challenges of a variety of sorts. But we had that problem on a little bit lower numbers level even before that, because we've had a struggle in getting some of the higher level professionals, psychiatrists and psychologists, to move into the western population centers, and so that continues to be a challenge. We know it's a good place to live, but there just aren't enough of them to go around.
So how can the legislature tackle that problem?
We're looking at having, for example, more licensed addiction counselors. We'll just talk about that substance abuse part for a moment. And we have several different thoughts in mind. There are mentorships that are a part of the process of a 1,400-hour unpaid internship right now. So there are professionals already working in the field, both for the Department of Human Services and for private not-for-profits, that mentor students during that time. It's an unpaid mentorship, or excuse me, unpaid internship. And the catch-22 is that they're technically not enrolled in a college or university, so they don't qualify for low-interest student loans. So Representative Silbernagel is actually working on that on his side in the Appropriations Committee right now, but that is one of the areas where we want to provide some financial support for both mentors and interns so that it'll be easier to do. We're also looking at some potential collaboration among the various licensing boards for the various types of mental health professionals to see if it might be easier to move into a different category with certain classes and try to avoid any silos. I don't think they intend it to be that way, but you know how that sometimes works out.
Sure. And in talking with law enforcement and other professionals, especially in western North Dakota, they have been basically almost yelling at the top of their lungs saying, we need the help.
They are overwhelmed, and law enforcement all over the state. I'll just describe it where it was first brought to my attention. Our local police chief in West Fargo, Chief Wrighton, said that they are the ones all over who get the call when somebody is acting up somewhere because of drugs or alcohol use. And so they get them in the back of their patrol car and they take them to the place where an assessment might take place. We don't have very many places in the state that'll do that. I'm lucky in the West Fargo area because there are places for those assessments, but they have a limited number of beds that they can use. And if the beds are full, they can't stay there. And so then they end up going back to the jails. Now, a prominent physician in the state just a couple of weeks ago said, over 100 years ago, when somebody had mental health problems, we locked them up in a mental hospital. Now we lock them up in jails. That's not an improvement. We have to do a better job there.
I know there's been the whole movement about getting people out of institutions and into places where they can get help.
Exactly, and we would like to have services closer by. One of the other provisions in this behavioral health group has vouchers so that there will be some client choices available. So if somebody needs mental health services or behavioral health services, let's say Valley City. That's just a perfect example because it's partway between Jamestown and Fargo, and those would be the closest regional human service centers. Right now, they would have to drive to Fargo or Jamestown for services. They may not be able to get off work if they're working. They may not have the money for gas. They might not have a reliable car. They may not have a car. But if we could give them a voucher, because there are providers that are in many communities that are not served by a regional human service center in the same city, they could get those services in Valley City and they wouldn't be missing out on the services they need. And the regional human service centers are overloaded. They have waiting lists. So it's no threat to the services being provided there except that the lines won't be quite as long.
How is that voucher idea being received?
I think very favorably. In fact, that's part of the recommendation that came from stakeholders, is that we could provide a broader base of services around the state through some of these counselors and including addiction counselors, if we just had a voucher that would enable the client to choose someone who might be closer. If you're in a city with a regional human service center, you still might want to use the voucher because you might not have to wait as long.
And of course, this is all going through the process, and appropriations will have to look at that.
They absolutely are at this time. In fact, they have really been working on it the last 2 or 3 days in the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the 3 gentlemen who have been working on that subsection have consolidated some of the bills, but in a good way. And so we do have one that deals quite a bit with vouchers, another one that has a lot to do with the substance abuse programs, and a third, we've kind of put them together there. So it'll be a little easier to manage as we move forward.
And this is all coming at a time, unfortunately, when the revenue picture is a little bit cloudy, if I can put it that way. Oil prices being down, some predictions that will affect sales tax and income tax collections too. So maybe, has it been a harder slog than you might have expected it to be?
Well, it wasn't what we expected. We're also very grateful then that one of the initiated measures didn't pass that would have really hit us here. But the point is that we are part of a global market, and that's what we have seen with the oil prices. And we know that at some point there will be a bounce back again, but we don't know how high. So we're waiting until the Moody's economic projections come forward on March 17th. That's a little later than we usually get them, but probably as late as we can go. And so this is true of every spending bill, pretty much. We are seeing that there are cuts in all of them, some of them that create a little more pain than others for us. But remember the old saw about making sausage, and we have to wait until the end. So we're trying to get it to a manageable number by crossover. And then as we work our way through the next portion of this legislative process, we'll hear what the projections are and be able to be a little more firm. And we're hoping that we'll be able to add some increases back in again, which would be wonderful. But it's way harder to give up something that you thought you had the money for than it is to do without it in the first place. So we want to really be careful about the sustainability of what we're doing.
And when, in terms of behavioral health, that's been kind of a priority for you and the interim committee that studied it. Is the legislature going to have this as a priority when it comes to doling out money?
I certainly think that we've got a great deal of awareness on the part of both parties about how important this is, because these stakeholders I mentioned are contacting their legislators and saying, this is what's going on in our neighborhoods. We need to do something. So again, it's just a matter of balancing what happens. I'm certainly supportive of all the money that we've got going into things like roads and infrastructure, and I'm not trying to be smart alecky here, but I said we got to talk about people and not just potholes. We really have to talk about what kind of services our individuals need, because we're going to spend a whole bunch of money on higher need healthcare, juvenile services, corrections, if we don't do something different from what we're doing now. We've got to figure out a better way to do it.
And is leadership buying into this?
Absolutely. And in both parties, they're committed to this. Senator Wardner, of course, is the Senate Majority Leader, and he is very committed to recognizing the needs. Dickinson, his hometown, is one of those areas which desperately needs some additional services here. So we're going to do our best.
Just as an aside, he and I had a very long discussion about this entire issue, and he said we need this, and,
Yes.
and he's very definitely committed to it.
Absolutely, and I'm confident that the other leaders are as well.
From the other human services perspective, since money is going to be the issue of this session, has it really affected how you discuss the issues?
Yes, it still certainly does, because, and it always would, that golden goose really seemed terribly attractive before the session started. And I actually am very grateful that the timing, if we were going to have this downturn in oil prices, I'm very grateful that it didn't happen any later than it did, because it has meant that there have been 2 or 3 iterations of the budget, but at least it came at a time when we can cope with it during the session, because this isn't something you can deal with in a 5-day special session somewhere. This is way more complicated than that. So your human service committees on both sides, but certainly I can speak best for my own side of the hallway. We really do look at what the cost is, and we have, sometimes with a little pain, recommended that there not be passage of bills that we thought probably didn't have the same cost effectiveness and potential return on our investment that some others might.
I'm going to go a little afield and ask you a question about early childhood education and pre-K education. If I remember correctly, you're pretty much a supporter of that.
I see the importance of pre-K education, but I also know it's very different in the it's laughingly called urban areas of North Dakota. I mean, when you think of what people in other very large populated states say, but for us, Fargo, West Fargo is an urban area. And it's much easier in any of the larger communities to have access to the services easily. But it's very different in those frontier counties, and we have 35 out of our 53 counties that do have 6 or fewer people per square mile. I don't want to see 3- and 4-year-olds on a bus for 45 minutes or an hour each way. The Extension Service has a wonderful program called Gearing Up for Kindergarten that is designed to instruct parents about how to work with their children in order to prepare them for kindergarten. There are some other things of that sort that might be helpful as well. So I think it's great that we have enabled districts to spend their own money on pre-K education that's raised. We're not forbidding anybody from doing it. It is not a mandate, and at this point I don't see that becoming a mandate. But I think enabling the local districts to cope with this, depending on what their own demographics and geography might be, at least for now, is probably the way to go.
Yeah, the local districts can make their own decisions on the one bill that's going, that seems to be getting some momentum in the Senate, and that's Senate education.
Right. I think that that's important. I kind of think local control is always important. I don't think I'm any smarter than the people working in the local cities and school districts and county boards and commissions. And so they know theirs best, and we need to figure out how to be good partners and let them do the managing.
I would like to get back into a human service issue that I've wondered about. You know, we've had this idea of deinstitutionalization for a long time, and the state hospital is there just for a backup. From your perspective, and this is probably just a little far afield of the legislature, but from your perspective, what you've seen, is North Dakota succeeding at more home-based treatment options, or do we need more? Do we have more work to do?
We certainly have responded, and in particular in the area of developmental disability, of course, we have almost emptied what is now the Life Skills and Transition Center in Grafton. And so we're looking, for one thing, in a study of what to do with that big campus that the state owns. And the state hospital has far fewer patients in it than it used to, because we're back to what the doctor said about 100 years ago. But most of us still see a need for some kind of residential facility, even if it's a shorter term one, in order to get people into a, I hate to say controlled situation, because you can't keep anybody for more than 72 hours in this evaluation process against their will, certainly. But we want to be able to provide services throughout the state, and even if it's a residential setting that might allow them to come down, to use a layperson's term, from whatever their problem might be, to get them started on a program that could be sustainable, and then they'd be able to visit that place regularly for follow-up. So one of the things that the Behavioral Health Project is working on is a standard assessment that would be used throughout the state. So if somebody moves, because we have some of that, They would be assessed in one place. The assessment would be consistent with how they would be evaluated in the next place. And they could continue a treatment plan. And in some cases, they might need to start out with maybe a higher level professional in one place, perhaps this short-term residential setting, and then be able to move to somebody that with a voucher they could have services with. So that's sort of the ultimate goal. It's just going to take a little time to get there.
I was going to say, setting up the assessment may not be the easiest thing in the world to do.
There is a new assessment tool that is highly regarded that we have had a lot of conversation about, and some of us really wanted to put that in the legislation, but there was a little pushback just because providers wanted to make sure they knew more about it than we already did because of the short time here. So we want to have them work together to see if that's the right one. But they do understand that there's a need there. We've also split it up in the bills so that the children's assessment is moving forward for those that have the greatest need, particularly those that are going into children's residential treatment facilities. And we have a few of those in state, but we also have some children who are placed out of state. Some of them are sex offenders, and we don't have a place for adolescent sex offenders in the state, for example. But we ended up evolving into a study of the right thing to do for the adult assessment, which is what this tool was that I was mentioning.
It's interesting that you have an awful lot on your plate. How do you keep it all straight?
Well, I told somebody it's kind of like throwing a whole bunch of different, totally identifiable and individual items into a blender. And then you have to know what each of them is. Is it a carrot or a piece of celery or whatever, or a tomato? And then you hit puree, and what comes out has to be palatable to the people that are served. This is sort of the same thing. It's challenging for everybody to keep track of all of this stuff, but we have some really great people on the Human Services Committee. I am so lucky. I have people who are back for the second or more time this time, and that is a big advantage. And also with all the other bills, we rely heavily on the people in the other committees to work as hard as we are in ours. So we still ask questions when they come up on the Senate floor, when there are bills that have been passed through another committee and now we're voting. But they trust us to have done our due diligence, and we trust that they have done the same. And we have a very broad array of political perspectives in our Human Services Committee. And if we haven't thought of a question in our committee, it's probably not going to come up on the floor.
But it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's a point that we probably don't make very much, that the North Dakota legislature deals with 1,000+ bills in an 80-day session.
Exactly.
And there's no way that anybody can know every issue that is out there.
Exactly. And when you see the Judiciary Committee come forward, and Senator Carolyn Nelson is sort of the designee for all of the uniform bills, which have lots of pages, and there's been tremendous detailed work done by the National Committee on Uniform Laws on these. I haven't read all the uniform laws. The people who are in the Judiciary Committee go over those, but they have actually been gone over in a 2-year period by the people who are on the Uniform Laws Committee nationally. And we do the same thing. We look very carefully at the bills that we have. But for someone who kind of gets into that whole thing that we've heard on the federal level, well, if you haven't read the bill, I think they ought to read them too, but they're a full-time deal and they've got staff. This is funny. This is funny, I think. I got an email from a young man who's originally from my area, who's graduating from an Ivy League school soon, and he wondered if he could work as an intern in my office next summer. So after I got through chuckling, I responded saying that I have neither an office nor a staff, and so perhaps he'd like to check with somebody else. We'd love to have him help, but I don't have a place for him to help.
Now, there's one thing, since you brought up the Judiciary Committee and what they're working on, one of the things they're working on actually, I think, relates to human services, and that's this whole idea of the human trafficking issue, which has really become a very huge issue. That's another huge issue in this legislature. Absolutely,
and I appreciate the fact that the media has been really great about describing a really bad problem that we have that we want to stop. But that's an example of the overlap, and that's why we walk across the aisle and talk to each other. I don't just mean partisan aisle, but I'll go talk to somebody who's on the Judiciary Committee about this, and they'll come and talk to one of our folks. This is an extremely collaborative legislature. Compared to other states, there is no comparison. And citizens have so many more opportunities for engagement than they do even across our borders in Minnesota. People who work both sides talk about how much easier it is to be able to visit with people on the North Dakota side. I'm proud of that. We are a citizen legislature, and we want people to know that they can catch up with us, and they do.
On this human trafficking issue, do you think North Dakota is going in the right direction?
I certainly do, but I trust the Attorney General and the Judiciary Committee to have thoroughly vetted this at this point. And we care about it on the Human Services side, but I'm really glad that those legal beagles are doing it on that side of the committee responsibility.
An awful lot happening in North Dakota.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to really throw kind of a left field curve at you. You represent West Fargo.
Yes.
West Fargo is a growing city.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had interesting issues with your education and growing enrollment.
Yes.
Have you been following that issue?
Very closely, as a matter of fact, because we had this year 509 new students on the first day of school. That's bigger than most districts in the state. And we have had from 400 to well over 500 new students every year for years. And so under the old formula of you could choose their early or late count, that worked okay for us. But under the new formula, there are many good things about that. I will not quibble about that. But we are really harmed by the big differential there is between the dollars that are provided when you can actually count the students who are sitting in the desks. So I'm watching it closely, work with Senator Flacco and the others in the governor's office on trying to do the right thing here, and hopefully we'll be able to make it work. Because there also is a bill in which says that the reserves have to be limited in the districts. Well, there may be some districts that are hoarding reserves. It's a little easier for a small district to do that because the numbers are smaller. But we have to have enough reserve to be able to cover the difference between well over $9,000 per student and a little over $3,000 per student that we're getting on 500 students now for this year.
So there's that much differential
Yes.
in what you're getting.
Yes. It's well over $6,000 difference.
And
per
you're building,
student.
you have a second high school in West Fargo?
We have a second high school, we have a second middle school, and we have oh my goodness, 12 elementary schools now? Anyway, we have about 9,500 students, and the projection, which just really got the school board's attention when it was brought to them a few weeks ago, is that by 2020 we'll probably be looking at 14,500 students. We can expect this continued growth. Part of the reason is because we are protected by Cheyenne diversion, and so much of the nice buildable space is in our school district. However, that will be used up at some point as well. So we are concerned also about the flood program for southeast North Dakota because that provides some additional protection for us from flooding from the Red River, which is a little different from the Cheyenne.
But still, it seems all kind of work together in some respects.
Intertwingled, as the little girl said.
Intertwingled.
Isn't that a great word?
I like that.
I do too.
There's another issue that I want to get into, and I've been asking everybody about this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a trumpet about we need to cut income taxes, we need to cut corporate taxes. It seems to have, there's still bills out there, but there's not that much of an appetite from what I can gather to eliminate those taxes entirely. What do you see from your perspective?
Well, I knocked on about 5,400 doors this fall when I was campaigning, and I didn't have one person ask for an income tax reduction because I think, in fact, we just learned today that it is 146,000 people that pay less than $100 in taxes, and 84,000 people who pay no income tax in the state. So it's still really reasonable. I think that all of us should pay a little rent for occupying space here. We have had many, many different tax reduction bills that have come through, and we can't continue to do tax reductions and also talk about the needs that we have in K-12 education, in infrastructure, and in human services. You just can't do that without recognizing the fact that the golden goose is on a diet right now, and we have to be careful not to be too reliant on one source of income. It hurt us before. I remember when the schools didn't get all the money the second year in the biennium. There was real pain from that, and as a result, we have the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund, so that will never happen again.
It's interesting you brought that up because I remember when I started covering politics in North Dakota in 1982 when the governor actually had to do an allocation.
Yes, that
and
was
I heard that
hurtful.
term today in some discussions. Is that really a serious discussion?
Well, there won't be an allocation for education, certainly, because the voters established the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund, and there's way more money in it now than one would ever anticipate needing. It was only used once, and then it was, I think, $5 million that was pulled out, and it is over $300 million now. So there is a bill that we passed the Senate this week, and will be moving on over to the House that would have some other education-related purposes to a portion of the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund. Low-cost building projects, scholarships, property tax reductions for districts, and so forth. I can't think of the fourth thing.
But there is still an idea that you do have that pot of money in case things really did.
Yes, we will not suffer. I think that's really important, and all the leaders acknowledge that. Because there's been good planning in the last few years, and because the voters have approved the Legacy Fund, we hear more about that than any of the rest, but other constitutionally designated funds to protect the ongoing base needs of some of the purposes for which they were intended, we will be just fine this biennium, and we are going to plan our very best for the oncoming ones by making sure we do sustainable spending projects now and that we don't jeopardize the balances that are in those funds, but enhance them as we move forward.
All right. Well, in the few seconds we have left, how many days?
Oh, if we get out of there in less than 80, fewer than 80, I would be real surprised. We're gunning for 75, but honestly, think about it. I'm not seeing that we're that much farther ahead at this point in this session than the last one.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Our guest today on Legislative Review, State Senator Judy Lee of West Fargo. She's the chairman of the Senate Human Services Committee. For Prairie Public, I'm Dave Thompson.